everyone, this is Megan Nodecker of Pip Pin, and this is the video tutorial for Afterthought Everythings, an Afterthought Everything sock recipe. For this tutorial, you're going to need your sock body. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. A darning needle, some yarn for your heels and toes and cuffs. This can be contrasting or it can be the same as your sock bodies. Some removable stitch markers. Safety pins also work well. You'll need some scrap yarn, measuring tape, and some scissors. So step one is making your sock body. And I've done this ahead of time, as you can see. For this, you're going to use whatever needles and whatever yarn works best for you. I've used a fingering weight wool nylon blend on US 0 2mm needles, and I cast on 64 stitches. If you want to do these in a heavier sport weight, or if you need to cast on less or more stitches, go ahead. As long as it's an even number, it'll work out just fine. So you can do them at whatever gauge you want. Now I've done mine in plain stockinette, but you can do them in a pattern, or ribbing works really well. Just remember that the pattern will go onto the bottom of your foot. So if you're doing something like cables or using baubles or things like that, just keep in mind that you will be stepping on it. So anything too elaborate might be a little bit uncomfortable. When you start your sock body, a provisional cast on, it'll save you a little bit of headache at the when we go back to do our cuffs, but it's not necessary. I don't think, no, for these ones I did not do a provisional cast on, but you can if you want to. It'll make things a little bit easier later. Now, how long do you knit your big sock tube? It depends on how long you want your socks to be and the length of your foot. The easiest way to do this is to take the length of your foot and minus your heels and your toes, which I'll talk a little bit more about later as well. And then you add how much length you want in the leg. So if you just want an inch for little shorty ones, add an inch. If you want longer legs, then just add some more. Also, this pattern works great if you're working from a half ball of yarn, or these ones I just knit 4 pattern repeats, 2 for each foot. That's just what I decided to do for these guys. So it's not actually critical how long you knit them, as long as you have enough to cover your foot, of course. These ones are 20 inches long, so I'll have, for my foot, I might have 2 or 3 inches at the leg. So once your tube is complete, we're just going to go ahead and put all your live stitches on hold. Now, if you have spare needles kicking around of the same size, or you want to put them on a spare set of needles to hold them, that's fine too. But I'm just going to go ahead and put them on our scrap yarn. Just like that. So I'm going to go around the whole thing. So now that we have put our sock body on stitches on hold, we're going to move on to step 2, which is either the most terrifying or funnest part of this pattern, depending on who you talk to, and we are going to be cutting this in half. Now, I made this real easy for myself by using self-striping yarn, so I know the middle of mine is right here. If you haven't used self-striping yarn, you can just fold it in half and estimate where the middle is, or if you are like me, you can count your stitches and find the middle of your sock tube and place a removable stitch marker on your row of stitches. Now what we're going to do is find the beginning and middle of our rounds. And the easiest way to do that is we pop back up and just do this in half. I've done mine on magic loop, so I can kind of see where that is. But to be sure, what I'm going to do is just find the beginning of my round up top here and just use a needle or darning needle or something, follow my stitches down and just follow the line all the way down. Now I've already done this, so I'm not being super precise anymore, but yeah, follow your stitches all the way down to where your halfway point is, and then find where your beginning of round and put another removable stitch marker or safety pin just right in there. Now when we cut these in half, we're actually going to be using 3 rows kind of, because we are going to, the way I do it is I put stitches on hold on either side, and then I cut it in half so that I know all of my stitches are going to be safe. Some people just, if you're super brave, just go ahead and cut it and pick up your stitches later. You can also, again, if you have spare needles, put them right on the needles. I like to do it with scrap yarn. So starting, yes, this is your beginning of round right here. And so what we're going to do is, if this is our middle row, we're going to be going on either side. So I'm going to start here, and I'm just picking up one leg from each stitch all along the row right below my middle row. So all the way across. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that all the way around my sock until I get back to this point. Okay, so I've got all of my stitches picked up along this row, all the way around and back to the beginning of round here. Now, when you're doing this, you just want to make sure that you're picking up the same leg of each stitch. So if you'll notice, all of mine kind of go this way. And it's okay if yours go this way, like the little lines here. It doesn't really matter which side you're picking up, as long as you pick up the same side all the way around. So if you see it switch somewhere, that's when you would go back and just make sure that you're picking up the same leg of each stitch. So now that that's all done, I'll take off my needle, give this a little snip. You don't really have to tie it off, but for safety. Now with your needle and thread again, or again, another needle or cable or however you want to do it. Now what we're going to do is here's our middle round row here. So we went one below, and now we're going to go one above. So here's our beginning of round. We're going to start 2 stitches up from there. And we'll just keep going around and picking up our stitches. So I'm just going to pull this through and show you. here's our Here's our middle row. So we're picking up one below and one above. And so I'm going to go ahead and pick up the rest of these stitches. All right, so here we go. I've got all my stitches picked up here, all the way around. So you can see quite clearly, there's the row of picked up stitches, your middle row with no picked up stitches, and then another row of picked up stitches there. So I'm just going to go ahead and give this a snip. All right, and then now you can remove your markers or your safety pins. And now comes the fun part. What we're going to do is, here's our beginning of round. We're going to cut on the opposite side. So it doesn't really matter where, but if we cut at the beginning of our round, then one side of our sock is going to have an extra long tail and the other side is going to have no tail. So it's very important that we cut on the opposite side of our beginning of round. But again, not super important where. So with our scissors, we're just going to pull up one strand from that middle row and cut it. And pull these two pieces apart. Now I find it kind of helpful to just use a darning needle and pull my stitches. And you'll see that as we pull, this middle row is disappearing, which is why we picked up stitches on either side of it. And sometimes when you pick them up like how I showed you, you might have gone through, see here I've kind of gone through the yarn, which is fine. You just pull it out and it'll be okay. And then you see our stitches on either side are nice and safe. So I just go down one side and unpick to the beginning of round, and I'll show you what that looks like when I get there. All right, so now we're getting back to our beginning of round. So I'll just kind of show you what that's going to look like when we get there. You can see our nice generous tail there. All right, try and move those out of the way for you. Now if we don't go all the way there, that's fine. But yeah, that looks about right. So I'm going to stop here. And then I'm going to go start working from the other side. You don't have to stick your whole arm in there, but I find it a little helpful. So then we just start working the other way, unpicking our stitches from the other side. So I'll do that and I'll show you what it looks like. All right, so now we are getting back to our middle point here. So I'm just gonna keep going. Gets a little bit awkward, but all right, so just about. And there we go. So now we have our two sock pieces. The very first thing that I like to do when they are separated is grab some removable stitch markers or safety pins or whatever and mark where my cuffs are going to be. So I mark the top of my socks. I think for these ones, I'm going to have, let me see. I think I'm going to have this at the bottom of my foot. So this light gray is going to be the top of my sock. Mark that. Mark that. Now, it is important with self-striping socks because you obviously want them both to go the same way. Not so important with other socks, but you do want all your stitches to be going in the same direction. So yeah, it is important to make sure when you split it, you mark the tops. I'll just put one of these aside for now, because now we're just going to be working on one sock at a time. All right, so now that we have our sock bodies separated, we're going to do our heels. And the reason we do the heels first instead of the cuffs or the toes is because the heels are cut in. So they're Afterthought heels. We're going to be cutting our knitting again. And so once it's done, it's done. If we were to do the toes first and then the heels, if we accidentally, cut the heels in at the wrong spot, then we'd have to go back and redo the toes. Nobody wants to do that. So I always do the heels first because you can always add or subtract rounds from other places to get the perfect fit. Now, in order to find where you're going to be cutting your knitting, there's a little bit of math, but it's not very hard. First, what you're going to do is grab your measuring tape and measure the length of your foot. So from the tip of your toe to the back of your heel, mine's about 9.5 inches. And then you're going to minus for your toes and your heels. Now, if you have a favorite, toe that you always do or favorite heel that you always do, you can go and measure, how long those are. Some of you might already know. A good rule of thumb is about 2 inches if you're doing, if you're doing a wedge toe and heel, which is what I usually do. So I'm going to be using 2 inches for the toes and 2 inches for the heels. So if my foot is 9.5 inches long, minus 4, 2 for the toes, 2 for the heels, I'm going to need to cut in my heel at 5.5 inches. So I'm going to flatten it out a bit and measure. And so 5.5, grab one of our handy dandy removable stitch markers here. Pop that in. And see, just to illustrate, there's the 2 inches for my toe, which brings us to 7.5, and then another 2 inches for our heel for 9.5. So that's kind of how that works. But that's where I'm going to be cutting in for my heel. Now, I don't really like that it's off center, so I'm going to change it a little bit. I'm going to put it right in the middle. And do that one. So that's where I'm going to cut it in. We're going to grab a couple more of these guys, because now what we're going to do is mark the edges, kind of like we did when we were cutting them in half. So we're going to find the beginning of our round, same way we did before. I didn't actually do this ahead of time, so I'm going to be a little more deliberate this time. Just follow your stitches all the way down. Find your middle row. Now that doesn't look like the middle anymore. It's looking a little awkward, but goes to show I should have done this beforehand. But there you go. There's our beginning of round on our row that we're going to cut our heel. And then I find it easiest to just take your number of cast on stitches. So I did 64, half of that, and count to the other side. So I'm just going to count 32 stitches. And I'm just going to put a marker on my middle row there. Okay. Now there are a couple different ways to cut in heels. If you have a favorite, just go ahead and cut in your heel however you like. But I am going to go ahead and show how I do it as well. Now how I do it is, here's your middle row. So again, we're going to be picking up our stitches one below and one above. So here's our beginning of round, there's our middle row, one below. Now instead of starting here, which is actually at our beginning of the round, I'm going to go over 2. And when I first started doing socks this way, I had asked for some tips on how to do Afterthought heels better. And one of the responses that I got from quite a few different people was to pick up 2 extra stitches past your middle points. So this middle point and that middle point. So we're going to be going 2 stitches this way, and then again once we get over here, we're going to be picking up an extra 2 stitches on this side. So since I cast on 36 stitches, half of that would be 32 plus 2 plus 2. I'm actually going to be picking up 36 stitches. And again, just like we did when we were separating our halves, of course this has to be in the darkest part. But there we go, just all the way across to where your other marker is, and then 2 stitches past that. So I'll do that and show you how that looks when I get there. So here I am coming up to the second marker that we placed on the other side of our sock body here. And there we go. I've just reached the beginning of round, or not the beginning. This is the middle of the round. So I'm going to do another 2 stitches right past that. Pull it through and stop. All right. So we've picked up half stitches, 1 below where we're going to cut, and then 2 past our midpoints there. Now what we're going to do is, you can use the same yarn, same needle. We're going to skip our middle row because we're going to be cutting that one. So 1, 2 down, and then we're going to pick up those stitches as well. So our 2 stitches past our midpoint, and then all the way across. Now when I say to pick up the same leg of each stitch. I talked a little bit about that before. It doesn't really matter, like I said, which side of the leg you pick up, as long as it's the same all the way across. And all that really does is, when we come to knit this later, you'll just have to see whether you need to knit through the back or the front of the stitch. If they're all going, a certain way, you might have to knit the first row through the back so that you don't get twisted stitches. Hopefully these ones do end up twisted so that I can show you what I mean. But if you pick up on the other side, then you'll just knit as normal. So all the way across there. I'm actually just going to take this one out because we don't really need it and it's kind of in my way. So now I'm back to the beginning. There. So picked up one stitch, middle row, that's where we're going to be cutting. And then, yeah, and I tried to make it even, but it's totally not on either side. Oh well. Yeah, so all the way around to 2 past the midpoint, and then back to the beginning. So we'll cut that. Okay, these markers can come out as well, because we are done using those. And now we're going to be cutting our knitting again. Now for the heel, we want to make sure that we're picking up or cutting it in the middle of the heel. Again, if we cut over here, well then there's going to be one long tail on this side and no tail on that end. So we need to think about our ends when we do this as well. And we're going to find one little strand from that middle row and kind of pull it out. I just want to make sure we don't cut any of the rows on either side. I'm just going to grab my needle again and start pulling out these stitches. Now, once we get to the end, we're not actually going to pull out all these stitches, because when I was asking for advice about Afterthought heels, another thing people had said is not to unpick the last 2 stitches. And the reason that I do that is so that there's not going to be any holes to sew up at the end, because we're going to be kind of knitting over them when we come back to do our heel. So we're getting kind of close to the edge here. It doesn't have to be, exact. 1, 2, oh yeah, there we go. So 1 stitch, 2 stitch, and I'm just gonna leave that there. So I'm not gonna go all the way to the end, and then it makes life much easier later, and I'm all about easy. So we're just going to unpick the other side. All right, so we're getting close to the other edge here. And so again on this side, I'm going to leave 2 stitches. 1, 2. And we're just going to leave it like that. So there is where your heel is going to be. Now, didn't really need that knot in there. Now we're gonna put our stitches back on our needle. Now if you have if you do this with DPNs, just do one side per needle. I do it magic loop, so I'm going to do it in a circle. So for these first 2 stitches, they're not, so they're all still there. So we're just going to follow where our scrap yarn is. And then we can start just picking up all of our stitches there. Right, so I've picked up all my stitches along the one edge of my heel, including those extra 2 there. Now I'm just going to turn it around, go in a circle, and start picking up here. Again, if you're using DPNs, just go ahead and put one side of the heel on one needle and one side of the heel on the other needle, or 2 needles, I guess it would be. So one side on one needle and then second needle, third needle. You know how to do it if you're using DPNs. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and just pick up the rest of these stitches. All right, so I've got all my stitches picked up here, and I'm just going to go ahead and take out my scrap yarn carefully. There. Tuck those inside. We can use those to, we'll weave those in at the end. But there you go. So now all of your stitches are on your needles to start your heel. And again, you can do whatever heel you'd like. The heel that I like to do is just a wedge heel. So I'm going to be using my contrasting yarn to knit 5 rows in stockinette and then begin my wedge toe. Right, so here is the finished heel. Again, the wedge heel. There it is. And see, that's where there's usually a hole, but not this time because of the extra 2 stitches there. So now that we're done the heel, we're going to go on to step 4, which is the toes. And you can do the toes and the cuffs in whatever order you want. I don't know, I kind of get into a groove with my wedges, so I like to do them next. Now is also a good time to try on your sock to make sure that it is going to be the right length and that you did cut in your heel correctly. If you didn't, you can always add or subtract some stitches from here. So what we're going to do is we've already got our stitches on hold there. So we're just going to go around and pick up our stitches from our scrap yarn, starting from the beginning of the round and going all the way around. So I'll get that done. All right, so now that your stitches are all picked up all the way around your toe, you can go ahead and take out your scrap yarn. Now make sure, back here is our marker for our cuff. So make sure that you are in fact working on the toe and not the cuff, because if I was to start here, that would be a very, very short foot. So yeah, you can start your toe now. I'm going to do again a wedge toe. I knit 5 rows of stockinette and then decrease 4 stitches per round every second row. Once I have 16 stitches per needle, then I Kitchener them together. But again, use whatever toe you like. So before I lose my light here, it's getting to be a little later, and all I have is window light. So before I lose my light here, I just want to talk a little bit more about the toes and the cuffs. And as you can see, I've started my toe. I'm about halfway done. I don't think I'm gonna finish before I lose this light. So once you're done the toe, and it's all kitchenered up, then you're gonna move along to do your cuff. And again, this pattern, it's not even a pattern. This recipe, you can do whatever cuff you like. Usually what I do is a 2x2 rib or 1x1 rib. You could do a rolled cuff. You could do some sort of eyelet rib, something. You could do a folded cuff if you wanted to. Whatever you want to do up top there, feel free. You can also add some length or take away some length if you want to. These ones are, I think I'm just gonna leave these ones because I kind of like I'd say they're mid-length, and I think I think I'll probably just leave those. Again, you can just pick up your stitches just like you did for your toe and knit your cuff right on. Now I'm just gonna quickly show the other end too, because this is your cast on edge. Yeah, this is your cast on edge. So this would be for the toe of your second sock, or however it works out in your sock. Just going to talk about that edge a little bit. Now, if you did the provisional cast on, great. Just unpick those stitches and you can knit your toe or your cuff or whatever that needs to be, just like we did the other ones. Now, if you were like me and did not do a provisional cast on, because sometimes I just don't feel like doing it, what I've been doing is, if you pretend this is a knitting needle, my other ones are busy, but what you're gonna do to put those stitches back on the needle is just find your beginning of round and find your first row of stitches, or maybe even one down. Like, it's not really crucial where these stitches come from, so I don't know, I usually do the first one there. So once all those are picked up, I just go ahead and cut this off. Or you can unpick it or do whatever. A provisional cast on is probably the easiest, but I just really don't like doing provisional cast on, and they never quite work out for me anyways. So I just kind of do it this way. I just cast on, I think this is a long tail cast on, and I'll just unpick it when I get to that point. So that's about it. When I do finish these, I'll put a picture of the finished socks, or finished sock. Maybe I'll be able to get it done tonight. If you are on Instagram, you can use the hashtag AfterthoughtEverythings. If you do project pages on Ravelry, make sure to link up to the Afterthought Everythings project. I would really love to see them. Show me all your different Afterthought Everythings. So here it is, your finished sock. For the cuff here, I've done just a 2x2 rib, and then used Jenny's super stretchy magic bind off for the top edge there. You can do whatever kind of cuff you want, and yeah, that's about it. You can just block it, weave in your ends, and there's your first sock. You just repeat the heels and toes and cuffs for the second one, and then you got yourself a pair. All right. Thanks so much, and enjoy.